Picture this. You're 7 months pregnant, sitting in a divorce court, about to expose the darkest secrets of your billionaire husband. You've gathered evidence that he's been slowly poisoning you, just like he did to his first wife. You're finally ready to tell the truth, and then you collapse. As you're writhing in pain on the marble floor, bleeding, your baby's life hanging in the balance. You look up at the man who promised to love and protect you, the father of your child, your husband of 3 years. He doesn't move. He doesn't call for help. He doesn't even stand up. He just sits there, checking his phone as if watching his pregnant wife nearly die is boring. That image, captured by dozens of cameras, would destroy Jonathan Westbrook's carefully crafted public image within hours. But what the cameras didn't capture was the 3-year nightmare that led to that moment. The systematic destruction of a brilliant investigative journalist, the web of lies, corruption, and murder that stretched back decades. This is the story of Sophia Carter, a woman who discovered that the American dream can become the ultimate trap when you marry a predator who will stop at nothing to maintain control. What you're about to hear will shock you. It will make you question everything you think you know about wealth, power, and the lengths some people will go to protect their secrets. This isn't just a story about domestic abuse. This is a story about survival, justice, and the courage it takes to fight back against someone who thinks they're untouchable. Are you ready to learn how far a billionaire will go to silence the women who threaten him? Let's begin. The fluorescent lights of courtroom B hummed with an electric tension that had nothing to do with the building's aging electrical system. Sophia Carter sat at the plaintiff's table, her 7-month pregnant belly making the wooden chair uncomfortable no matter how she positioned herself. Her lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s named Rebecca Walsh, shuffled through papers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen too many ugly divorces. Across the aisle, Jonathan Westbrook sat perfectly still, even now, even here, surrounded by the legal machinery that would finally tear apart their marriage. He looked like he had stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine. His dark hair was precisely styled, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that came with a net worth measured in billions. Sophia's hand instinctively moved to her stomach as another sharp pain shot through her abdomen. These weren't the gentle kicks she had grown accustomed to. These were different, urgent, wrong. Mrs. Westbrook, Judge Martinez called from the bench, her voice cutting through Sophia's growing discomfort. The court is ready to hear your testimony regarding the financial assets in question. Sophia stood slowly, her legs suddenly feeling weak beneath her. The morning sickness that had plagued her first trimester had returned with a vengeance over the past week. But this felt different. This felt dangerous. Your Honor, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. My husband has systematically hidden assets throughout our marriage. He has used shell corporations and offshore accounts to ensure that in the event of divorce, I would receive nothing. Jonathan's lawyer, a silver-haired man who probably charged more per hour than most people made in a month, stood to object, but before he could speak, Sophia felt the world tilt sideways. The pain in her abdomen intensified, radiating outward like fire. He isolated me from my career, she continued, gripping the edge of the witness stand. He destroyed my professional reputation through planted stories in the media. He convinced me that my friends and family were jealous of our success, that I should trust only him. The words kept coming, even as her vision began to blur. This was her moment, her chance to finally tell the truth about what Jonathan Westbrook really was. He has been systematically poisoning me, she said, her voice rising. He has been working with Dr. Elena Vasquez to slowly administer toxins during my prenatal appointments. He murdered his first wife, and he plans to do the same to me once this baby is born. The courtroom erupted. Jonathan's lawyer was on his feet, shouting objections. Rebecca was demanding order. Judge Martinez was banging her gavel. But Jonathan himself never moved. He sat perfectly still, his gray eyes fixed on Sophia with an expression of complete emotional detachment. No shock. No anger. No concern for the woman carrying his child who was clearly in distress. And then Sophia collapsed. The sound of her body hitting the marble floor echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. She lay there, one hand still protectively covering her belly, watching as people rushed toward her. Paramedics were called. Someone was taking her pulse. But Jonathan remained seated, even as his pregnant wife writhed in pain on the floor of a public courtroom. Even as cameras flashed and reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks, Jonathan Westbrook did not move. That image, captured by a dozen phones and cameras, would be splashed across every news website within the hour. The billionaire tech mogul who couldn't be bothered to help his collapsing pregnant wife. The man so cold that he watched the mother of his child suffer without even standing up. As Sophia was loaded onto a stretcher, consciousness fading in and out, she caught one last glimpse of her husband. He was checking his phone, scrolling through what looked like stock prices, as if nothing had happened at all. 6 months earlier, Sophia Carter had been a different person entirely. She had been one of the most respected investigative journalists in the country, known for her ability to expose corporate corruption and bring down powerful men who thought themselves untouchable. Her apartment in Brooklyn had been small, but filled with the tools of her trade stacks of documents, recording equipment, and a wall covered with photos and string connecting various players in the stories she was investigating. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She had built her reputation through sheer determination and an unwavering commitment to the truth. The Westbrook Industries story was supposed to be her biggest break yet. She had received an anonymous tip about the company's labor practices in their overseas manufacturing facilities. Workers were being subjected to dangerous conditions, paid below subsistence wages, and prevented from organizing. It was exactly the kind of story that had made her career. Jonathan Westbrook had agreed to an interview, which was surprising enough. Most CEOs in his position would have hidden behind layers of PR representatives and corporate lawyers, but he had personally called her to set up a meeting at his office in Manhattan. Sophia remembered walking into that gleaming tower of glass and steel, riding the elevator to the 50th floor, and being ushered into an office that was larger than her entire apartment. Jonathan had been standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over Central Park. When he turned to greet her, she had been struck by how different he was from what she had expected. He wasn't the stereotypical tech billionaire. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with an easy smile and genuine warmth in his gray eyes. He had offered her coffee, asked about her background, and seemed genuinely interested in her work. "I've read your articles," he had said, settling into a leather chair across from her. "You have a real gift for finding the human story behind the corporate facade." The interview had gone nothing like she had planned. Instead of defensive corporate speak, Jonathan had been thoughtful and self-reflective. He had acknowledged that his company wasn't perfect, that they were working to improve conditions in their facilities. He had spoken passionately about his vision for using technology to solve global problems. By the end of their 2-hour conversation, Sophia had found herself agreeing to have dinner with him. That dinner had led to another, and then another. Jonathan had been unlike any man she had ever dated. He was brilliant and successful, but he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He asked about her work, encouraged her investigations, and even provided contacts who might be helpful for her stories. Within 3 months, she had moved out of her Brooklyn apartment and into his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The transition had seemed natural at the time. Why pay rent when she could live in luxury? Why struggle with a small apartment when she could have access to Jonathan's resources? But looking back now, Sophia could see how carefully orchestrated it had all been, how he had slowly, systematically separated her from her old life. First, it had been subtle suggestions. Maybe she should freelance instead of working for the newspaper full-time. She could be more selective about her stories. Focus on the really important investigations. He could provide financial support so she wouldn't have to worry about money while pursuing bigger stories. Then came the planted articles. Stories that questioned her journalistic ethics, suggested she was too close to her sources, implied that she was willing to sacrifice accuracy for sensationalism. At first, Jonathan had been sympathetic. He had comforted her, told her that jealous colleagues were trying to undermine her success. "They can't stand that you're with me," he had said, holding her as she cried over a particularly vicious piece that accused her of fabricating quotes. "They want to tear you down because they can't handle your success." Gradually, her former contacts had stopped returning her calls. Sources who had once trusted her began to question her motives. Editors who had once fought to publish her work started rejecting her pitches. Within a year, Sophia Carter, the investigative journalist, had effectively ceased to exist. In her place was Sophia Westbrook, billionaire's wife, whose main occupation seemed to be attending charity galas and being photographed at society events. She had tried to maintain her independence, tried to continue working on smaller stories, but Jonathan always seemed to need her for something. A business dinner where her presence was essential, a weekend trip to the Hamptons that couldn't be postponed, a charity event where her attendance would mean so much to the cause. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he would say when she protested. "I need you there. You're the only person I can trust." And because she loved him, because she believed he loved her, she had gone along with it. She had told herself that this was just a phase, that once they were married, once their relationship was more stable, she would be able to return to her career. The wedding had been a lavish affair at his estate in the Hamptons. 300 guests, mostly Jonathan's business associates and social connections. Her own guest list had been surprisingly short. Many of her old friends had drifted away over the past 2 years, and those who remained seemed uncomfortable in the world of private jets and designer gowns. Her brother Jackson had been her only family member present. Their parents had died in a car accident when Sophia was in college, leaving Jackson, 5 years older and fiercely protective, as her closest relative. He had pulled her aside during the reception, his face serious. "Are you sure about this, Sophie?" he had asked, using the childhood nickname that only he was allowed to use. "Something doesn't feel right about this guy." "You're just being overprotective," she had replied, though even then she had noticed how Jonathan's jaw tightened whenever Jackson was around. "He loves me, Jack. He wants to take care of me." "That's what I'm afraid of," Jackson had said. But Sophia had dismissed his concerns as brotherly jealousy. Jackson was a successful defense attorney, but his practice was small compared to Jonathan's empire. She had convinced herself that her brother was intimidated by her husband's wealth and success. Now, as she lay in the hospital bed, V-tubes running into her arm and fetal monitors tracking her baby's heartbeat, Sophia realized that Jackson had been trying to warn her. Her brother had seen what she had been too blind to recognize, that Jonathan Westbrook wasn't rescuing her from her struggles as a journalist. He was systematically destroying the woman she used to be. The hospital room was sterile and quiet, broken only by the steady beeping of the fetal monitor. Sophia had been sedated for the first 24 hours after her collapse, giving the doctors time to stabilize both her and the baby. Now, as consciousness slowly returned, she found herself staring at the ceiling tiles and trying to piece together how her life had become such a nightmare. Detective Maria Santos sat in the chair beside her bed, notebook open, pen poised. Sophia recognized her immediately. Even after 3 years, Maria had been her primary source on a series of articles about police corruption that had won Sophia a Polk Award back when her career still existed. "Hey, Sophie," Maria said softly. Her voice carried the same warmth it always had, but there was something else there now. Concern, fear, maybe. "Maria." Sophia's voice came out as a croak. "How did you know I was here?" "Your little performance in court yesterday made the evening news," Maria replied. "When I saw what happened, when I heard what you said about being poisoned, I had to come check on you." Sophia tried to sit up, but Maria gently pressed her back down. "Easy. The docs say you need to take it slow. But Sophie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "What is it?" Maria leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Did you mean what you said in court about Jonathan poisoning you? About him murdering his first wife?" Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes. For the first time in months, someone was actually listening to her. Someone believed that she might be telling the truth instead of assuming she was having some kind of breakdown. "I know how it sounds," Sophia said. "I know it seems impossible. But Maria, I've been getting sicker and sicker over the past few months. Not normal pregnancy sick, something else. And the way he reacts when I mention it, the way he insists I see his doctor instead of finding my own." Maria nodded grimly. "I've been doing some digging since I heard about your collapse. Did you know that Jonathan's first wife, Catherine, died under suspicious circumstances?" Sophia's heart rate spiked, setting off alarms on the monitors. A nurse appeared in the doorway, but Maria waved her away. "We're fine, just excited about the baby." "Sorry, Mom." When they were alone again, Maria continued. Catherine Westbrook died of what was officially ruled acute hepatic failure, liver poisoning. But here's the thing. She was healthy as a horse right up until 3 months before she died. And guess what she was trying to do at the time? File for divorce, Sophia whispered. Bingo. And get this. Her divorce attorney was found dead 2 weeks after Catherine died. Apparent suicide. Guy supposedly jumped off the Queensboro Bridge, but his body was never recovered. Sophia felt the room spinning. That's not possible. Jonathan wouldn't. He couldn't. Sophie, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I think you're in real danger, but I also think you might be the key to finally getting justice for Catherine and her lawyer. Are you willing to help me? Before Sophia could answer, the door to her room opened. Jonathan walked in, carrying a massive bouquet of white roses, his face arranged in an expression of loving concern. He looked every inch the devoted husband rushing to his wife's bedside. Darling, he said, moving to kiss her forehead. I was so worried. The doctors say you had some kind of allergic reaction, but they're not sure to what. Sophia noticed how he completely ignored Maria's presence, as if the detective weren't even in the room. I'm fine, Sophia said carefully. Just tired. Of course you are. You've been under so much stress with the divorce proceedings. I've been thinking, maybe we should call the whole thing off. Focus on our family instead of fighting in court. The suggestion was delivered in a gentle, reasonable tone, but Sophia heard the threat underneath it. He was offering her a way out, but only if she agreed to go back to being his prisoner. I think that's something Sophia and her lawyer should discuss, Maria interjected, standing up. Mr. Westbrook, I'm Detective Santos with the NYPD. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your wife's condition. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but Sophia saw something flicker in his eyes. A calculation, a moment of weighing options. I'm sorry, Detective, but I think my wife needs her rest. If you have questions about her medical condition, you should speak with her doctor. Dr. Elena Vasquez has been handling all of Sophia's prenatal care. Actually, Maria said, checking her notes, Dr. Vasquez seems to be unavailable. Her office says she's out of town indefinitely. That's interesting timing, don't you think? For the first time since Sophia had known him, Jonathan Westbrook looked genuinely rattled. It was just for a second, just a tiny crack in his perfect facade. But it was enough. Maria had hit a nerve. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, Jonathan said smoothly. Elena works with several high-profile clients. I'm sure she'll be back soon. I'm sure she will, Maria agreed. In the meantime, Mr. Westbrook, I'd like to schedule a time to speak with you about your first wife's death, just to clear up a few inconsistencies in the file. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jonathan's smile never wavered, but his voice took on a hard edge that Sophia recognized. It was the tone he used with business rivals, with people who had made the mistake of thinking they could challenge him. Detective Santos, I'm not sure what you're implying, but my first wife died of natural causes. It was thoroughly investigated at the time, and the case was closed. If you're trying to upset my pregnant wife with wild conspiracy theories, I'll have to ask you to leave. Of course, Maria said pleasantly. Sophie, you have my card. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. After Maria left, Jonathan sat in the chair she had vacated and took Sophia's hand. His touch was gentle, loving, but she could feel the strength in his fingers. The implicit threat. Sophia, darling, I need you to understand something. That woman is not your friend. She's trying to manipulate you, to use you to advance her own career. I know you used to work together, but that was a long time ago. You're different now. You're my wife, the mother of my child. Jonathan, Sophia said carefully, what if she's right? What if something really is wrong? What if someone is trying to hurt me? He squeezed her hand tighter. The only people trying to hurt you are the ones filling your head with these paranoid delusions. The stress of the divorce, the pregnancy hormones, they're affecting your judgment, but I'm here. I'll protect you. I'll always protect you. That night, alone in her hospital room, Sophia lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 3 years, she had a choice to make. She could go back to Jonathan, accept his offer to call off the divorce, and hope that she was wrong about everything. She could try to convince herself that Maria was mistaken, that her fears were just pregnancy paranoia, or she could trust her instincts. She could believe that the man she had married was capable of murder and that she might be next. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. Because even if she was wrong, even if she was being paranoid, she had to protect her baby. And every maternal instinct she had was screaming that Jonathan Westbrook was dangerous. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over a year. "Jackson," she whispered when her brother answered. "I need help." Jackson Carter arrived at the hospital at 3 in the morning, still wearing the suit he'd had on in court that day. Despite the early hour, his eyes were sharp and alert. As one of the city's most successful defense attorneys, he was used to crisis calls at all hours. "Sophie," he said, pulling her into a careful hug that avoided the IV lines and monitor wires. "What the hell is going on?" Sophia had forgotten how safe she felt with her brother. Jackson had always been her protector, ever since their parents died. He was only 5 years older, but he had stepped into a parental role without hesitation, making sure she could finish college, helping her get her first job at the newspaper. "I think Jonathan killed his first wife," she said without preamble, "and I think he's trying to kill me too." Most people would have told her she was being ridiculous. Most people would have suggested therapy or medication for postpartum depression, but Jackson just nodded and pulled out a legal pad. "Tell me everything." Sophia started from the beginning. The gradual isolation from her career and friends. The way Jonathan had systematically destroyed her professional reputation. The increasing frequency of her doctor's appointments with Dr. Vasquez. The strange symptoms she'd been experiencing that didn't match any normal pregnancy complications. "And this Detective Santos," Jackson said, taking notes. "You trust her?" "I do. She was my best source back when I was still working. If she says there are problems with Catherine's death investigation, I believe her." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, tapping his pen against the legal pad. "Sophie, what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear." "What do you mean?" "I've been investigating Jonathan for the past 2 years. Sophia stared at her brother in shock. "You've been what?" "After your wedding, after I saw how he treated you, how he was changing you, I hired a private investigator. I've been building a file on him, trying to find something that would convince you to leave him. Jackson, how could you not tell me? Because I knew you wouldn't believe me. You were so in love with him, so convinced that he was this perfect husband. I needed proof before I could come to you." Jackson pulled out his phone and scrolled through several screens before handing it to her. "This is what I found." The screen showed a detailed dossier on Jonathan Westbrook, financial records, business dealings, personal relationships, but it was the section on his first wife that made Sophia's blood run cold. Catherine Westbrook had been a successful real estate attorney when she married Jonathan. Within a year of their marriage, her practice had mysteriously lost several major clients. By year 2, she had been forced to close her firm entirely. She had filed for divorce 3 months before her death, citing emotional abuse and financial control. "There's more," Jackson said, taking the phone back. "Catherine had been seeing a psychiatrist in the months before she died. Dr. Vasquez? The same Dr. Vasquez who's been treating me, the same one. And get this, after Catherine died, Dr. Vasquez suddenly had enough money to open her own fertility clinic, a very expensive fertility clinic that caters exclusively to wealthy clients." Sophia felt sick. He paid her. He paid her to poison Catherine, and now he's paying her to poison me. That's what I think. Yeah, but proving it is going to be difficult. Jonathan is careful. He uses intermediaries, shell companies, offshore accounts. Everything is at least 2 steps removed from him personally. "What about Detective Santos? Can't she help?" Jackson's expression grew grim. "Sophie, there's something else you need to know. Maria Santos has been under investigation by Internal Affairs for the past 6 months. Someone has been feeding information to IA, suggesting that she's been taking bribes, that she's been compromising investigations." "That's impossible. Maria is one of the most honest cops I've ever known." "I believe you, but someone with a lot of influence has been working very hard to destroy her credibility. Someone who might be worried about what she's been investigating." The implications hit Sophia like a physical blow. Jonathan hadn't just been destroying her life. He had been systematically eliminating anyone who might pose a threat to him. Catherine's divorce attorney, now Maria Santos, and eventually, Sophia herself. "We have to do something," she said. "We have to stop him. We will, but we have to be smart about it. Jonathan doesn't know that I've been investigating him. As far as he's concerned, I'm just your overprotective brother who never liked him. That gives us an advantage." "What kind of advantage?" "He's going to underestimate me. He's going to assume that as your lawyer, I'm only interested in getting you a good settlement in the divorce. He won't see the criminal case coming until it's too late." Jackson stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Sophie, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we go after Jonathan, he's going to fight back. He's going to try to destroy both of us. Are you prepared for that?" Sophia looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she was still wearing. 3 months ago, she would have said no. 3 months ago, she still believed that the man she had married was capable of love, even if he expressed it in controlling ways. But she had seen the look in his eyes when she collapsed in court. She had seen his complete lack of concern for her welfare, for the welfare of their unborn child. Whatever Jonathan Westbrook felt for her, it wasn't love, it was ownership. "I'm prepared," she said. "What do we do first?" "First, we get you out of here. The hospital isn't safe. Jonathan has too many connections, too much influence. We need to move you somewhere. He can't reach you." "Where?" "I have a safe house, a place I use for clients who are in witness protection. Jonathan doesn't know about it." Jackson moved back to her bedside and took her hand. "Sophie, once we leave here, there's no going back. We'll be committed to seeing this through to the end, no matter what it costs us." Sophia thought about Catherine Westbrook, about the woman who had tried to escape and paid for it with her life. She thought about her unborn son, about the kind of man Jonathan would raise him to become if she didn't stop him. "I understand," she said. "When do we leave now? Before Jonathan comes back for visiting hours? Before Dr. Vasquez mysteriously returns from her trip?" Jackson helped her disconnect the monitor leads and remove the IV line. Her discharge papers listed her condition as exhaustion related to pregnancy stress and recommended bed rest and follow-up with her regular obstetrician. As they made their way through the hospital corridors, Sophia felt like she was finally waking up from a 3-year nightmare. For the first time since her wedding day, she was making her own choices, taking control of her own life. She just hoped it wasn't too late. The safe house was a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, the kind of place that would never show up on Jonathan's radar. Jackson had set it up years earlier under a false name, using it to house clients whose lives were in danger from the people they were testifying against. For the first time in months, Sophia slept peacefully. No strange dreams, no waking up in the middle of the night feeling sick and disoriented. Whatever Dr. Vasquez had been giving her was finally working its way out of her system. Jackson had spent the night on the phone with his contacts in law enforcement, building a coalition of people who were willing to go up against one of the city's most powerful men. It wasn't easy. Jonathan Westbrook had donated millions to police charities and political campaigns. He had friends in high places who owed him favors, but he also had enemies. Other businessmen he had crushed on his way to the top. Former employees who had been destroyed for asking inconvenient questions, and most importantly, Detective Maria Santos, who had never forgotten the inconsistencies in Catherine Westbrook's death investigation. "We have a problem," Jackson said when Sophia woke up the next morning. He was holding his phone, his face grim. "What kind of problem?" "Jonathan held a press conference this morning. He's claiming that you've had a complete mental breakdown, that you've been struggling with severe postpartum depression and paranoid delusions. He's filed papers to have you committed to a psychiatric facility." Sophia felt her carefully rebuilt confidence crumble. "He can do that. He's trying. He has statements from Dr. Vasquez about your mental state, documentation of erratic behavior, even recordings of some of your therapy sessions where you supposedly talked about feeling paranoid and persecuted. Those recordings have to be fake. I never said any of those things. I know that, and you know that. But to a judge who doesn't know you personally, they're going to sound pretty convincing, especially combined with your collapse in court and the wild accusations you made about being poisoned." Sophia sank into a chair. feeling the weight of Jonathan's power crushing down on her again. So what do? We fight back, but we have to be careful. If Jonathan succeeds in having you committed, we lose everything. You'll be drugged and isolated, unable to help with the investigation, and he'll get full custody of the baby when it's born. Jackson sat down across from her, his expression serious. Sophie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there any chance that you've been having psychological problems? Any chance that some of what you've been experiencing could be explained by depression or anxiety? The question hurt, but Sophia understood why he had to ask it. If their case was going to hold up in court, they needed to be absolutely certain about the facts. I know the difference between mental illness and being poisoned. Jackson, I know the difference between paranoia and having a legitimate reason to be afraid. Okay, then we proceed. But we need evidence, and we need it fast. Maria Santos is working on getting Catherine's body exhumed for a new autopsy. If we can prove that she was poisoned, it'll go a long way toward establishing a pattern. What about Dr. Vasquez? If we can find her, if we can get her to talk, that's our best shot, but she's disappeared completely. Her clinic is closed, her apartment is empty, and none of her colleagues know where she went. Over the next few days, Jackson worked frantically to build their case while Sophia tried to stay hidden and safe. They had some early successes. Maria Santos found irregularities in the original investigation into Catherine's death. The medical examiner who had performed her autopsy had retired immediately afterward and moved to a small town in Florida, where he now lived in a house that was far beyond what his pension should have afforded. They also discovered that Jonathan had recently taken out a massive life insurance policy on Sophia, with himself as the sole beneficiary. The policy had been purchased just 2 weeks before she announced her pregnancy. It's all circumstantial, Jackson warned. We can establish motive and opportunity, but we still need direct evidence that he was actually poisoning you. What about the blood tests from the hospital? Wouldn't they show if I had been poisoned? They tested for the usual things: drugs, alcohol, common toxins. But there are plenty of substances that wouldn't show up on a standard tox screen, especially if they'd been administered over a long period of time. That's when Sophia remembered the vitamins. Jonathan had insisted she take a special prenatal supplement that he had ordered from a private pharmacy. She had always thought it was just another example of his obsessive attention to detail, but now she wondered if there might have been more to it. I need to get back into the penthouse, she told Jackson. There are things there that might be evidence. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Jackson, if those vitamins were tampered with, if there's correspondence with Dr. Vasquez, if there are financial records showing payments to her clinic, we need that evidence. We'll find another way. But Sophia was already formulating a plan. She knew Jonathan's schedule better than anyone. Every Tuesday, he had standing meetings that kept him at the office until at least 8 p.m. The building's security staff knew her, and Jonathan wouldn't have thought to remove her from the access list yet. She could get in and out without anyone knowing she had been there. I'm going, she said. With or without your help? Jackson stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. If you're determined to do this, then we do it right. We go together, we have backup, and we get in and out as quickly as possible. That Tuesday evening, Sophia found herself standing outside the building that had been her home for 3 years. From the street, it looked the same as always. Elegant, expensive, intimidating. But now she could see it for what it really was, a beautiful prison. The doorman recognized her immediately and waved her through without question. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like the longest 90 seconds of her life. When the doors opened, she was looking at the foyer where she had entertained Jonathan's business associates, where she had played the role of the perfect billionaire's wife. Now it felt like a movie set, artificial and empty. The vitamins were exactly where she had left them, in the medicine cabinet in the master bathroom. She grabbed the bottle and shoved it into her purse, then moved to Jonathan's study to look for financial records. That's where she found the folder. It was labeled Contingency Plans and contained documents that made her blood run cold. Detailed psychological profiles that had been compiled about her, documenting her strengths and weaknesses, her fears and insecurities. Plans for gradually isolating her from her support system. And most chilling of all, a timeline for her breakdown that corresponded almost exactly with what had actually happened. At the bottom of the folder was a single photograph, Catherine Westbrook, looking happy and healthy, taken just days before she died. Sophia was so absorbed in reading the documents that she almost didn't hear the elevator doors opening, almost didn't hear the footsteps in the foyer. Jonathan was home early. Sophia's hands shook as she quickly photographed the documents with her phone, the camera flash seeming impossibly loud in the quiet apartment. She could hear Jonathan moving around in the kitchen, probably pouring himself his usual evening scotch. In a few minutes, he would come to his study to review the day's emails, and he would find her here with evidence of his crimes spread across his desk. She shoved the papers back into the folder, trying to arrange them exactly as she had found them. Her pregnant belly made it difficult to move quickly, and she bumped against the desk chair, sending it rolling backward with a soft squeak. The footsteps in the kitchen stopped. "Sophia?" Jonathan's voice carried a note of confusion. "Is that you? Darling." She had two choices: try to hide and hope he didn't come to the study, or face him directly and try to bluff her way through. The study had no other exit, and the windows were 50 floors above the street. There was nowhere to run. "I'm here," she called back, trying to keep her voice light and casual. She grabbed the vitamin bottle from the desk and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Jonathan appeared in the study doorway, still holding his glass of scotch. He looked genuinely surprised to see her, which gave her a moment of hope. Maybe he really didn't suspect what she was doing. "What are you doing here? I thought you were staying with Jackson." "I needed to get some things," Sophia said, gesturing vaguely around the room. "Clothes, personal items. I still have a key." Jonathan nodded slowly, but she could see his eyes taking inventory of the room, checking to see if anything was out of place. His gaze lingered for a moment on his desk, and Sophia held her breath, certain he would notice that the folder had been disturbed. "Of course," he said finally. "This is still your home. You're welcome here anytime." The reasonable tone, the gentle smile, it was all so perfectly calculated. Even now, even when she knew what he was capable of, part of her wanted to believe that he was just a concerned husband who loved her. "I should go," she said, moving toward the door. "Jackson is waiting for me." Jonathan stepped aside to let her pass, but as she reached the doorway, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was firm but not painful, just enough to stop her from leaving. "Sophia, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about. Jonathan, we're getting divorced. Everything else can be handled through our lawyers." "Is that really what you want, to tear apart our family over some paranoid fantasies?" She looked up at him, this man she had once loved more than anything in the world, and saw nothing but cold calculation in his gray eyes. "They're not fantasies. Aren't they? You collapsed in court, making wild accusations about being poisoned. You disappeared from the hospital against medical advice. You're hiding in some apartment in Queens, convinced that your own husband is trying to kill you. Does that sound rational to you?" The way he said it, so reasonable and concerned, made her question herself for just a moment. What if she was wrong? What if the stress of the divorce and the pregnancy had affected her judgment? Then she felt the weight of the vitamin bottle in her pocket and remembered the documents she had just photographed. Whatever game Jonathan was playing, she wasn't going to fall for it again. "Let me go," she said quietly. "I can't do that. Sophia, you're not well. You need help." "I need help. You're the one who's been poisoning me. You're the one who killed Catherine." Jonathan's grip on her wrist tightened slightly. "Catherine died of liver failure. It's a tragic but natural death. And you're not being poisoned. You're having a psychological breakdown brought on by pregnancy hormones and the stress of our marital problems." "Then explain the life insurance policy. Explain the payments to Dr. Vasquez. Explain why you never seemed surprised by my symptoms. Why you always had explanations ready." For the first time, Jonathan's mask slipped. Just for a second, she saw something darker underneath, something that had no concern for her welfare at all. "You've been busy," he said softly. "I'm disappointed. Sophia, I really hoped we could resolve this amicably." He released her wrist and pulled out his phone. "Dr. Martinez. Yes, it's Jonathan Westbrook. I need you to come to my apartment immediately. My wife is here, and she's having another episode." "Yes, I know it's late, but this can't wait. She's a danger to herself and the baby." Sophia felt panic rising in her chest. She had to get out of the apartment before this Dr. Martinez arrived, whoever he was. Jonathan, please, just let me leave. I'm sorry, darling, but I can't do that. You need professional help, and I'm going to make sure you get it. He moved to block the doorway completely, and Sophia realized she was trapped. The study had no other exit, and Jonathan was bigger and stronger than she was. Even if she weren't 7 months pregnant, she wouldn't be able to fight her way past him. That's when she heard the sound of the elevator doors opening again. Mr. Westbrook, an unfamiliar voice called from the foyer. It's Dr. Martinez. I brought the sedatives you requested. Sedatives. They were going to drug her, probably to make her appear unstable when they brought her to whatever facility Jonathan had arranged. Once she was there, once she was under the control of doctors who were loyal to Jonathan, she would never be able to prove what he had done. In here, doctor, Jonathan called back. Sophia heard footsteps approaching, and desperation gave her clarity. She grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from Jonathan's desk and hurled it at the window behind her. The glass didn't break. It was reinforced, designed to withstand the wind and weather 50 floors above the street, but it made a loud cracking sound and set off the building's security alarm. What are you doing? Jonathan lunged for her, but she was already moving. She pushed past him and ran for the foyer, where she found a tall, thin man in a doctor's coat holding a medical bag. Dr. Martinez looked startled by the alarm and confused by the sight of a pregnant woman running toward him. Help me, Sophia gasped. Please, he's trying to kill me. Mrs. Westbrook, you need to calm down, Dr. Martinez said in a soothing voice. Your husband called me because he's concerned about your mental state. I'm here to help you. He's lying. He killed his first wife, and now he's trying to kill me. Jonathan appeared behind her, his face a mask of concerned confusion. Doctor, as you can see, she's having severe paranoid delusions. I think we need to act quickly before she harms herself or the baby. Dr. Martinez nodded and reached into his bag. Mrs. Westbrook, I'm going to give you something to help you relax. Sophia backed toward the elevator, but Jonathan moved to cut off her escape route. She was trapped between two men who were convinced she was insane, or at least pretending to be convinced for money. That's when the elevator doors opened and Jackson stepped out, followed by Detective Maria Santos and two uniformed police officers. Step away from my sister, Jackson said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years in courtrooms facing down hostile witnesses. Jonathan's expression shifted to one of surprised innocence. Jackson, thank God you're here. Sophia's having another breakdown. We were just trying to get her some medical attention. Is that right? Maria Santos stepped forward, her badge visible on her belt. Mr. Westbrook, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Sophia Westbrook and the murder of Catherine Westbrook. This is ridiculous, Jonathan said, but Sophia could see the panic in his eyes now. You have no evidence of any crime? Actually, we do. Maria pulled out a warrant. We have a court order to search these premises and to examine any medical substances found here. We also have testimony from Dr. Elena Vasquez, who has agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for immunity. Dr. Vasquez had been found, and she was talking. Sophia felt her knees go weak with relief. Jackson was there immediately, supporting her as the uniformed officers moved to arrest Jonathan. You did it, Jackson whispered in her ear. You got the evidence we needed. As Jonathan was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Sophia one last time. The mask was completely gone now, replaced by pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done, he said. You think this is over. This is just the beginning. 3 days later, Sophia sat in the district attorney's office, feeling safer than she had in months. Jonathan was in jail. Dr. Vasquez was cooperating with authorities, and the evidence against him seemed overwhelming. The vitamin bottles from the penthouse had tested positive for several toxins that would cause the exact symptoms Sophia had been experiencing. Dr. Vasquez had provided detailed testimony about how Jonathan had paid her to slowly poison both Catherine and Sophia. The case was so strong that the DA was confident of getting a conviction for first-degree murder in Catherine's death and attempted murder in Sophia's case. Jonathan's high-powered legal team was already floating plea deal offers, trying to avoid the death penalty. We should have the preliminary hearing next week, Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Walsh explained. I want to write about what happened to me, about women like Catherine who don't survive these situations. You'll be great at it, Jackson said. You always were. Jonathan tried to take that away from you, but he couldn't really destroy who you are. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Jack, if you hadn't been investigating him, if you hadn't believed me, that's what family is for, Jackson said simply. They were walking back to Jackson's car when Sophia noticed the black sedan following them. It stayed exactly 3 cars back, making the same turns they made, stopping when they stopped. Jackson, she said quietly, I think we're being followed. He glanced in the rearview mirror and frowned. Jonathan's in jail. It's probably just reporters trying to get a statement. But Sophia's instincts, honed by years of investigative work, were screaming that something was wrong. The car wasn't being driven like someone looking for a story. It was being driven by someone with training, someone who knew how to maintain surveillance without being detected. We need to lose them, she said. Jackson nodded and took a series of random turns, trying to shake their tail. But the sedan stayed with them, always maintaining that careful distance. Finally, Jackson pulled into a well-lit parking lot in front of a 24-hour diner. We'll go inside and call the police, he said. If someone is following us, they won't risk approaching us in a public place. But as they got out of the car, 3 men emerged from the sedan. They were well-dressed, professional-looking, the kind of men who could blend into any corporate environment. But there was something about the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves to cut off escape routes, that screamed danger. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Westbrook, the lead man said politely. We need to have a conversation.